All right, we're starting to see some folks come in. Hello, good evening if you're on the East Coast. How's everyone doing? Or if you're on the West Coast, good afternoon. And if you're elsewhere, good morning or good very late into the evening. I know we've had some participants in the past who would join us across the world where it would be like literally past 2, 3 a.m. And I just love the dedication for them to be learning and filling their curiosities. Drop it in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what are you hoping to learn today. We've got an amazing panel with Sarah, Mandy, and Jen on board to, of course, talk about international business expansion in a global pandemic, which is such a really good topic to have in store for y'all tonight. Sarah will be our moderator. All right, MJ is in DC. Cool, cool. How about the rest of you? So in case anyone's curious, I am in Connecticut, but I'm actually based in New York and I'm heading there later in the evening. And if the panelists, if you'd like to share where you're at too, that is also encouraged.
I'm in New York. I am inside of Chelsea Market at the moment, and it looks like it's 9 o'clock outside, but I know it's only 6.
Yeah, it actually is only 6. Daylight savings time is tricking us here.
I'm in New Hampshire and I'm going for the cabin vibe, which is why it's a little darker on my screen.
Love it. And I love that you paired it with a hoodie.
I'm in Los Angeles, California.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we've got a handful of y'all on board, so we will get started. Is the recording on? Yes, it is. Okay, amazing. So everyone, welcome once again to International Business Expansion in a Global Pandemic with our speakers, Sarah, Mandy, and Jen. We're really excited to have you here with us. This is going to be a jam-packed panel talking about women in business and what that looks like, and of course, the legacy of a very special person who used to be a part of GA. Her name is Jessica Volman. And before I hand it to Sarah to talk a little bit about the foundation and what the scholarship entails, which I'll also drop a link to include about it, a little bit about me. My name is Angela and I work on the marketing team for General Assembly New York City campus. And a little bit about me is that I'm very passionate about connecting like-minded individuals, whether it's with each other to a product or service. So I'm very honored to be here with y'all tonight. And I am a child of immigrants, so this is also a way for me to give space to individuals who may not have been represented in the past. So if you would like to be involved as a speaker or partner, feel free to directly message me in the chat as well. And one little fun fact is that even though I may be in the city amongst the concrete jungles of the sky towers and whatnot, my soul definitely belongs by the beach, and I'm sure many of you can agree with me. But now, Sarah, if you'd like to speak a little bit about Jessica Volman Foundation, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so welcome everyone who's tuned in. I'm Sarah Volman, and my family and I founded the Jessica Volman Foundation last year after, unfortunately, the untimely passing of Jessica, the namesake of the foundation. And it was kind of an obvious conclusion that we all made that we needed to create some type of charitable enterprise to continue Jess's legacy. Jess most recently was a CEO at a language learning startup called Fluent City. Prior to that, she had created her own consultancy called the Volman Group, where she consulted on startups expanding internationally, which is our connection to the topic today. And then prior to that was at General Assembly as the director of new market expansion, working under Mandy and also working with Jen there as well. And originally starting in 2011 as an events producer. So this is a full circle moment for us to be able to collaborate with GA. So Jess was a mentor for women entrepreneurs, and it was kind of her passion in life to be able to bridge the gap and sort of the corporate ladder for women pursuing entrepreneurship. And so our mission for JVF is to promote career advancement for women globally through access to education, closing the skills gap, and job flexibility. So with that, we are collaborating with GA on a JVF sponsorship. That's our first grant that we're very excited to have out there, which covers all three of the tenets of our mission, which is wonderful. So we're excited to be able to have Mandy and Jen here to get started and talk about sort of some of the themes that we are exploring within the foundation, as well as international expansion.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. And everyone, as I've said, soon I'll be dropping the link if you want to apply or maybe share with a friend or family who would be eligible for the grant. A little bit about GA before I pass it back to Sarah, as she is the moderator for today's panel. We started back in 2011 as a co-working space, but quickly grew to be a global tech and business education service company. So right now we have around 30 campuses across the world, some virtual, some are definitely back in person, but more will be in the roster of becoming back in person, including my beloved city, New York. We are planning to reopen early next year, so definitely stay tuned for that news. And a little bit about what we do is that we have the mission of helping individuals get into the career that they want to pursue. And so how we do it is we offer free panel discussions and fireside chats like this, along with paid workshops and full-time, part-time courses in very demand skills in different industries, but predominantly tech and business. So that includes coding, UX design, career development, business, marketing, specifically digital marketing, and data. So yeah, we are a very wide community of a range of awesome entrepreneurs, lifelong learners, and just curious humans. And the one little plug I want to share is that since COVID, we realized that we wanted to make a lot of our content more accessible. So we started Free Friday, which is basically a list of our most popular workshops that are traditionally paid, but we're offering it as free on Fridays. So that means this Friday, trickling into December 10th, every Friday, we have a section of workshops that are free. So make sure to check out the bit.ly link, which I'll also share in the chat. And then a little bit of webinar norms. Yes, this is being recorded and we'll be sharing it in our follow-up email at the end of the week. And on top of it, we will be receiving questions throughout, so make sure to drop it in the Q&A button. We will leave time in the end to go over them. And additionally, the chat box is also open to leave any interactive comments or feedback you may have. And we do like to keep it social. So if you want to share any of the learnings that you might want to share with our audience too, feel free to tag us at General Assembly on Instagram. And that is it. I am going to pass it back to Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, so I'm going to introduce our two panelists to everyone. So first, we have Mandy, who spent the last decade building spaces and ecosystems.
Thank you. Did you throw it in the trash?
Sorry, it sounds like somebody may be off mute. Let me just make sure that we're good here. Okay, I think we're.
Oh man. Okay, so Mandy spent the last decade building spaces and ecosystems and is currently leading those efforts for Jamestown, which is a design-focused real estate firm best known for developing Chelsea Market, which she's at right now. Please welcome Mandy. Woohoo. Okay. And Jen is the co-founder of JJELLYFISH, which helps international founders across India, the UK, and Australia expand into the US market. They've supported over 125 B2B and enterprise startups to validate their sales process and US go-to-market. Please welcome Jen. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
So to start off, I know I prefaced with you all both we're obviously very, very close friends of Jess and are familiar with the foundation as well as being former GA employees. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and your connection to us at JVF, as well as how you got into international expansion and sort of what your experience has been like within that aspect of the tech industry?
Jen, you want to go first?
I knew that was coming. I was just waiting for you to say it. Sure, I'm happy to. So JV, myself, and Mandy were all, what were they, like the first 20? Were we all in the first 25 employees at GA? First 30?
25, 30. Yeah.
25, 30.
Jess was
yeah. So we
earlier
all
than both of us.
yeah, we all had the pleasure of getting to be a part of that, like really, really early stage venture, which is actually where all my time and attention is focused to right now. And in terms of international expansion, what Jessica used to do for UK companies specifically in terms of helping them expand here into the US market, also more on the operations side, I do very much the exact same thing, except on the sales side. So really, really excited to be here today. I know how important kind of the international flavor was for Jess in terms of work and travel and just culture and being a part of it all. And really excited to just help and support US based and international folks think about, you know, growing and establishing themselves in a very unpredictable market that we are in.
And so Jess and I had basically opened the second to 20th cities for General Assembly. So Angela and folks like her and all the regional markets, those were the people that we were hiring on the ground when we first went to a city, putting together the operation plans of how we were going to launch, where we were going to be based, what the go-to-market strategy was going to look like. And it was always such a pleasure to work with Jess and travel with her. We had quite a few adventures, both domestically and internationally. A lot of fun stories came out of that. So, you know, it's really wonderful to be able to be here and celebrate her and really continue on her legacy in a meaningful way at a place where, you know, Jen, Jess, and I all met. So I'm really happy to be able to do this today.
Wonderful. So just to kind of start on this topic, for anyone that is watching this and is maybe thinking about expanding their business internationally, whether that be out of the US or into the US, what are sort of the key factors that they should consider when debating if they're ready to take that step? One thing that I pulled from an article that Jess wrote a few years ago was, if you can't take considerable market share, don't launch. Do you guys agree with that? Do you have any tips? What should people sort of consider if they're thinking about it?
Yeah, I actually love that quote. So I will take it from the lens of, if you're an international company looking to come into the US, and this actually pertains to if you're in the US and looking to go international, is what % of the market you're entering make up kind of that total addressable market, right? And I know that's kind of a little bit of a fluffy word because it's such it's more of a guardrails than it is a finite answer. But, you know, for international startups, especially if you want to be a global company, right? US market is the #1 checkbox on that list, right? And if you can show proof and traction in one of the largest markets in the world, especially on the B2B side, right, that unlocks so much other things that can happen later on. So I always say with, you know, folks building, especially a B2B startup looking to come into the US and they want to be a global first company, you should come here yesterday, right? It usually takes twice as long to figure it out and twice as much money than what everyone always predicts. So I always say start as soon as possible, get evidence, just validate, does this market even care about the problem we are solving? or have a similar passion we do as we create X. And go out and validate and just talk to people in the market. You don't have to, establish, you don't have to build an office necessarily on day one. You don't have to go out and hire someone day one. Just go out and talk to people and see if they share the same commonalities and if it is worth, further exploring. So just run a little bit of a validation sprint first, but more importantly, understand how much does this specific market play into the overall storyline we're trying to go here.
And I would say I agree with that. And the caveat being there would be a higher threshold for international markets as opposed to domestic markets. When we were evaluating what cities to expand to, we did look at the size of the addressable market, what the potential size of our market share looked like. And that threshold for entering into a new city was always lower for a domestic market than it was for an international market. I think when you go into an international market, the cost of entry is just so much higher in terms of the administrative fees, the legal fees. There might be different regulatory environment you're dealing with. Just the setup costs to starting a business in a new country is just so expensive that and time intensive that it should be at least double or triple the potential size of domestic expansion, because you'll probably be able to open a few domestic markets in the amount of time it takes to set up an international one. And related to that, along the lines of what Jen was saying, I remember the early days of GA, one of the things that took a lot of trial and error for us to figure out was really understanding sort of the gravity problems that come with new countries, so that you can't overcome and you have to adapt to. So some of that involves like really identifying who the customer is and who the buyer is of your product, and that may not be the same person. So in the US, really it was an education product that we were selling. It was continuing education that the buyer and the consumer of that was both individuals at that point early on in GA. So it was people who were really looking to invest in their future and maybe was considering grad school, and this looked like a pretty good alternative. And then so we decided to go to Berlin because Berlin was a hot, sexy tech city at the time. And we figured, hey, software development, this is a great city to go into. We didn't really look at the fact that the German government heavily subsidizes education. So people there are used to paying $1,000 for 4 years of college. And so we're trying to sell them the same product that we were in the US at, I think it was at the time, it was $2,500 for part-time continuing education courses. Got nowhere, did not get off the ground. We had to close that. So, the amount of time we spent early on trying to learn those lessons was quite expensive because you're pretty cash strapped at the time for an early company. But in subsequent entries into other countries, that was a really useful lesson because we were able to take those learnings and really identify who the buyer is. And in a lot of cases, that might actually be the government, even if they're individuals who are going to be taking the classes.
Yeah, I think those cultural nuances are so critical because they can be so minor, but like to Mandy's point, so drastic when it comes to your business model, right? We do a lot of work with India, and I hear time and time again that the US dollar is 3x the equivalent in their market, right? And they get so excited because they can come here and sell a solution at 3 times the value of what they're able to do in their local markets. But what people don't necessarily realize in different markets is just the technical maturity difference, the process maturity, how people are used to buying. There's a lot of these cultural nuances. Like in the US market, you can say to someone like, hey, are you the person actually in charge of solving for this? And if so, like, how would you create budget to pay for it? And if you did that in another market, like on the first call or the second call, they would see that as extremely rude. Right. So it's just learning out all these different cultural nuances too when you go into these new markets. And I think what Jess did, or what Jessica did, that was really Jess, I call her Jessica behind, not talking to her, Jess to her face. It's funny, I'm like using them interchangeably. What Jess did really well was I think she focused so specifically on the UK market and the European market and really helping them figure out how do you tackle the US as quickly as possible, right? Because we know speed is so important.
So like you guys are talking about when evaluating a new market to launch into, and you're talking about cultural differences in those places, how does market research change now that we're in a pandemic and you can't fly necessarily to Berlin to talk to as many people as you can, over a weekend in a work trip? Obviously you all have learned all of these nuances over time with different projects and clients that you've been working on, but what is maybe something that people can do to market research and plan in this new environment that we're in with limited travel?
Yeah, I do this every day. So man, you want me to start?
Sure. I always want you to go first.
Yeah, you want me to like bring the bar down so you can come up here and crush it. I know. Be your punching bag. The beauty is the cold email is life-changing, truthfully. Like you can send a thoughtful email to someone who you have no idea who they are. You can get in their inbox, you can get their mind share by writing something that is thoughtful and personalized. And if you do it right, they're willing to give you their time to talk, right? Especially if you're reaching out to the right people and you're speaking to a problem that they have. Like cold email is a really beautiful thing. And we help companies in all of these international markets figure out how to email their target market here in the US and just have a Zoom call, right? Actually, people aren't meeting face-to-face as much. I think that's a little bit more sacred now, as meeting face-to-face, and especially in sales. That happens more. And I don't know how much this is going to change. That's still a hypothesis, but I believe in-person meetings are now a bit more of a sacred cow that are happening towards the end of conversations, or toward the end of the funnel versus at the top of funnel. And at top of funnel, I think having a Zoom call, having a chance to get to know one another, because to a buyer, meeting someone face-to-face is actually now a big deal, right? Before it used to be like, okay, if someone's willing to come into my office and see me or go out to lunch, that's fine. But now coming out of the pandemic, I think it is a much bigger deal than it ever was before. And I don't think people want to meet face-to-face until they have the confidence that they know this might actually go somewhere, right? They don't want to make that too early of a commitment. So you can, from day one in your local market, wherever you are, or your small region looking to, break into much larger cities, you can do this from home. And all it takes is a well-crafted cold email and Zoom, and also knowing who you want to learn from and what you want to talk about. So you do not have to do this face-to-face anymore. And I think, in fact, trying to do it face-to-face actually might hurt your chances more than just asking someone, hey, can we get on a call for 20 minutes? Here's a problem I'm deeply passionate about solving. Would love to understand, is this something that you face too?
I would take a slightly different approach than Jen, but also I'm not on the sales side. But learning about a new city and what that looks like, just reaching out to my network of people that they may not be a direct link, but they could make a warm intro to somebody who's there, that they know, whether they're tangentially touching that industry or the specific thing that you're trying to learn about. I found that to be incredibly useful. Actually, I'm in the process of trying to figure out and learn about a specific market that I have never been to right now. Just even reading, background information on it, but the best source of knowledge I do find is from people who live there. And so being able to get introductions through other contacts who've lived in nearby areas or know people who live there has been tremendously helpful. Just even learning, what do you read? Where do you live? Where do you work? How do you get to work? What does the transportation look like? I mean, I think I deal so much in the physical, like real estate, that it's really hard in this COVID world to be able to get a good picture of something without physically being there. And that's something that, whenever we used to explore and do diligence on a new city, the first thing Jess and I would both do is get on a plane and go there for 2 to 3 days and talk to people and talk to like who our target market would be and talk to the people who would eventually be on the team there and ask them like, where do you live? Where do you find out about information, like events that are happening in your city? What do you care about? And just really deeply understand the persona of the people that we are trying to build a community with. And so you can do that virtually to a degree. And I still think that ultimately, I mean, like Jen said, I mean, it might happen much later on in the process, but ultimately, being there in person, there's nothing that really replaces it. But I think that is I think the expectation is that that's going to just happen much more infrequently now. And that's okay, which is probably good for the environment,
Yeah, you're getting quite the spectrum of answer, because my
Yes.
whole thing is you want to learn from people who you don't know, because that's what's going to give you the real raw insight, versus Mandy, who's saying because you're like when you're physically there, you want to speak to people who you do know, because they're going to give you the real raw insight. So it's just like funny.
Well, actually, no,
is
most
really
of the
cool.
time they're intros from other people, and they're not people that you actually know first, like they're
Oh,
not
okay,
direct
that's-
relationships.
Yeah.
But I find that most people are incredibly helpful if you give them very specific guidance on what it is they are looking for. I think in most conversations, in most networking conversations, or even business conversations I have, I generally end the conversation with, how can I be helpful to you? And I find that generally is very often reciprocated. So just asking those questions and being authentic in your desire to help is the easiest way.
I love learning from strangers, because they usually will tell you the brutal truth sometimes.
It's true.
It's like when you get in a cab in New York and you speak to the cab driver and you like open up your heart and you're like, this person's going to give me like a real answer here, versus like your friends are going to like sugarcoat it a little bit. Mandy knows I've had conversations with cab drivers all the time.
Oh yeah, they give the best advice. I have too.
Okay, great. So if you've now evaluated, you're ready to open in this new market, it's a worthwhile endeavor for your business, and you're hiring your team in the new market, what is sort of the strategy that you would recommend for that first hire? Would you recommend sort of a local person that understands that market, who can sort of be the general manager of that office, et cetera, or an existing hire who understands strategy and more high level, more of a high level understanding of what you're trying to do to open that new market?
Ideally both, but usually impossible. I think that was always the trade-off, especially at GA when we were doing this, because the internal system, especially as a company gets bigger, as with any company, as it gets bigger, it's more complex, trying to wrangle resources and knowing who to go to for what. That in itself is a learning curve that you need to have before kind of going off onto a random city and trying to get things off the ground. And so we always struggled with what was better, somebody who knew how to navigate who had the institutional knowledge that they can then deploy to a new city, and had already been working at GA for a year or two. Or was it someone who knew the local market really well, who knew who sort of the nodes were that could connect people, that could really bring in audiences, help to build the local brand and build sort of equity in that local community. And honestly, like ideally both, but usually that's really hard to find. I think the one thing that we discovered that was probably the most important was we didn't want to just have somebody sort of helicopter in and then leave after a few months. That was actually the most detrimental thing. So even if you're going to bring somebody in who had the institutional knowledge, make sure it's somebody who is planning on staying there for the long term and actually building roots in that city. That was extremely important, because there are so many relationships that you're building early on in expanding to a new place. And when somebody leaves and they have to transfer those relationships and that knowledge base, you probably lose more than 50% of everything that they've built. And so I would say like that probably is the most important thing, is hiring locally early on.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with Mandy. I'm all about hiring in pairs too. Sometimes someone is more successful than another, and it's great to see why. And more importantly, to Mandy's point, maintaining that institutional knowledge as well. But yeah, someone I think locally is really important to understand the cultural nuances at an accelerated pace. But then the other thing too is someone that knows how to navigate the ambiguity of starting on day one. I mean, starting on day one is like, you got to be scrappy. You've got to get creative. I mean, day one mentality is also really hard to find as well. It's easier to find someone that you can hand over a playbook to and say, go execute this. And if you don't, sometimes you do have that, right? If you're more of a mature company that's launched in new markets, but if you're not, being able to find someone that is really strong, knowing how to, get out of that maze while also having someone that knows the cultural nuances paired with them.
We have Sarah, I was going to say, there's a question on the side of how would you bring GA to Japan, Korea, or China, where the locals do not speak English on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Because we explored all those countries. We went to China, went to Korea, looked at Japan. Short answer is you find a local partner, because especially it's not just the language, but the culture is completely different. The market is completely different. I mean, the entire marketing channel, we kind of have so many different channels in the US, like everything from print to digital to social to outdoor even. In China, it's literally like WeChat and outdoor advertising, and that's it, and maybe TV. And so even we spoke with the editor of Vogue in China, and she's like, literally all I have is a strategist who works on WeChat because that's the only advertising channel, like direct advertising channel in China. And so you need a partner who really understands the nuances of the local market, what they need, and how to make really the financials work. GA didn't decide to go into China because we couldn't make the economics work. It didn't make sense. We could not deliver at the pricing and the at the pricing that we needed to in order for it to be an attractive product offering to somebody who lived in China, making the salaries that they would make in China. Similarly, in Korea, at the time we looked at it, it also, the market was really not risk tolerant enough. There wasn't a huge sort of entrepreneurship sector. It was starting to form. There was some venture funding in place, but for the most part, what the idea of success was still working for Samsung or a Hyundai, like a large, massive conglomerate. It wasn't really that receptive to kind of leaving your job and changing careers. And then in Japan, actually, I don't even know if I can say this, but Japan is the market in Japan was actually more similar to some of the markets we looked at in Europe, where companies really were the financial sponsors of continuing education. People were at jobs for much longer term and duration than they are in the US typically. And so the onus of continuing education usually fell to the employer. So they were really the buyers of education as opposed to like individuals or employees themselves. And so, the strategy there in Japan was really to find a partner who was large enough that and had a large enough talent pool that they wanted to retrain for us to sort of do that initial deal. And when I was there, we had spoken to a very large company, and it had been in the works for years. And so, it it was still going by the time I left, and it had probably been 4 years by then. So, I mean, Jen knows this, the sort of these B2B deals and enterprise deals just take a lot longer to close. And sometimes they seem dead for a while and then they may come back. And so as far as I know, it's still alive. I got a text actually not that long ago telling me about literally that deal in Japan that is still alive. So I don't think that's off the table just yet. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question.
Jen, did you have anything on that, or that probably covered that?
No, that covered. I mean, I think to Mandy's point, the biggest insight in that was your buyers are different in every market too, right? Like, who's actually the end buyer? Is this a more of a consumer-led motion in this market, or is it more of a, you know, a B2B motion in another market? Especially when you're dealing with something where it pertains to jobs, right? That can really truly vary.
Yeah.
Great. I feel like we were touching on this a little bit, but I'm curious for you all and the people that you consult, Jen, does your go-to-market strategy differ depending on the size of the company? For an SMB or mid-market or enterprise, are there different strategies based on size, or is that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's a great question. They all start with the same chapter. So our thesis, at least in our business, is every startup, whether you're product-led, marketing-led, sales-led, community-led, which, you know, a lot of was GA, it's all founder-led first, day one, right? So can the founder go out and manually recruit users or buyers to be excited to spend money on X, right? That's the chapter we play in. Once the founder can show that the market is willing to pay for the solution, now it comes down to, great, how can we make this repeatable and scale it? And it's usually one of those other motions that then kind of step in after founder-led, which is much more of a manual activity. But day one in a net new market, you should start out with founder-led, because to Mandy's point, if they took what we built in GA US and literally like, great, this works, let's just drop it or airdrop it into Japan and it will be successful, it would have failed immediately. In fact, probably any international market, it would have failed immediately, right, Mandy? But it sounds like it took, you know, Mandy and the founders of GA to go in first and Jess to navigate this and understand, and I would call it validate it, before they really deployed a go-to-market motion for those specific markets. So to your question, yes, it all splits off eventually, but it all starts with founder-led selling on day one.
And I think generally too, the larger the company, the longer that sales cycle is going to be.
Oh yeah.
Just the amount of bureaucracy that you're probably having to deal with, finding the right person within the organization and having all of that have to get escalated up for approvals before things come down. There's just a lot more layers that you have to get through in order to get things approved, is what we found. Yeah, and then probably related to that is even longer probably are governments. I did quite a bit of work with governments after I left GA. I was working for another company where I was also building really tech ecosystems that were largely public-private partnerships. And, you know, it's just a whole different set of constraints that they're dealing with, and processes and approvals and compliance. And it's great because I think you get to impact just so much larger population of people, but at the same time, you know, it does take a lot longer to do. So if you are a smaller company that is reliant on revenue and cash flow, and you know, and you have like a certain amount of time before your funding runs out, you might not. I mean, if you want to try to catch a big fish, but that's a lot to put in one basket.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the I call it like up market and down market. Up market is the enterprise, much harder to crack in terms of time and check boxes they need checked, but they're also the most predictable, right? Because they all kind of operate in the same way and same protocol and processes, and it's very sticky. They're also, it's the longevity of an enterprise deal is or lifetime value is incredible. And then the further down market you go, the more unpredictable it is, because they're all a little bit different and structured differently, and some churn out a lot faster because they don't end up making it and others do. And it all depends in terms of what sandbox you want to play in, but they all have their trade-offs. You can get a deal done faster, but it's going to be a lot smaller.
Gotcha. Going back a little bit to when you all were talking about cultural differences in a market or when evaluating customers, have you noticed in your experience any sort of unique obstacles for women in this sector and in international expansion doing what you do that people should be considerate of or aware of?
I was on a call once. I'm not gonna name the country I was dealing with, but I got on a call and the gentleman on the other side said, "I don't negotiate with women," and I say, "I don't do business with people like you," and we both hung up.
Yeah, I've definitely had my share of that as well, and I've been very fortunate in that, you know, the companies I've worked for and the people that I've worked with have also had the same mentality of like, that is just not something that we're willing to accept. In general, though, I do think, you know, I think in the US, we have pretty clear black and white, not black and white, that's not the right word, but like, I think we have certain standards of what we think is progressive and moral and all of that, that maybe not applicable to other countries, or, you know, or they're just on a different timeline. And so like having a little bit of a thick skin in certain respects and understanding that this is not necessarily out of malice, but maybe possibly ignorance, or it's just curiosity, or like this is just the business norm there. It's not that we may, you know, under US sort of guidelines, we might find a bit offensive or like, oh, this isn't what we talk about normally, or we're not allowed to ask those questions. Like, for example, like I definitely get asked how old I am in a lot of Asian markets I go to, because that's normal for them to ask you. I mean, in certain places they can ask your weight, which is kind of crazy to me. Certain types of jobs, but you know, just these things, they're things that we attribute sort of a judgment on when somebody asks those questions, but they may think this is perfectly normal. I think the other thing around the whole thing about sort of like what is ethical, what's not, is also just, you know, I just think I can remember back to a time when we were trying to decide whether or not we wanted to be in the Middle East in a GA. You know, there's a lot of people have a lot of thoughts. People had a lot of thoughts, employees, you know, other stakeholders. And I remember our CEO at the time had a really tough time trying to figure out what the right move there was. Because on one hand, you know, there's all the stuff that we know about, probably things that we don't think are fully like at 100% of the human rights and sort of equality that we would set as a standard. But at the same time, you know, the thing that we were doing was also educating women data scientists specifically in the Middle East. And so like it became a really sort of difficult decision point, because on one hand, we may not agree 100% with everything that's coming out of the government there, but at the same time, like our specific role in it was very much in line with our values and our morals and what we were trying to further in general. And so, you know, trying to help be part of the solution was kind of where we landed, but I know that it wasn't an easy decision for everybody that was involved. And, you know, it was also during a time where there was a lot of other stuff going on in the region. And so, you know, having clear guidelines on what it is that you're trying to do with the company that you're building, I think is really important. And early on, when we were working at GA, we went through a really rigorous exercise defining what those values were. So those can really serve as your North Stars when you do face sort of more complicated decisions on whether or not you think this is the right move for the company and whether this is something that is within the, within your code. So yeah, I mean, I think nothing is very clear sometimes, but there are certain things that you can do ahead of time to kind of try to steer yourself in the right direction when that happens.
It's a really great point, and thank you both for those answers and speaking to your experiences with that. So you both talked about advice you have for sort of a first hire in a new market and what attributes that person should have. In the pandemic, if you're sort of acquiring additional talent in your new market, so whomever you're hiring after that initial person, are you finding that it's become more or less complicated with people transitioning to a hybrid form of work in the future or being remote, or has it been sort of an opportunity for increased diversity in a way that maybe you didn't expect? Or what are your kind of thoughts on acquiring talent and fostering community after that first hire?
I can go. In general, right now, I'm sure everybody is feeling this. Hiring has been so difficult. There's just a dearth of people out there that are qualified, and I think everybody is always looking for a unicorn, and so that's been quite difficult. And then just I think being more realistic in general about, you're probably going to get 8 out of the 10 attributes that you're really looking for. I think for the most part, we found that, still hiring locally is kind of unbeatable. We would love to be able to hire, at least right now. It's actually interesting. A lot of the roles I'm hiring for are really similar to the types of roles that Justin and I used to hire when we were launching a new market. And just that local knowledge base is so important. Just knowing what that local community values, cares about, operates, how they think, what really speaks to them. It's really hard to replace that and have somebody sort of dial in remotely and understand that. You can help them along. You can, if it does open up the pool, this sort of hybrid work, if you can't find somebody locally, like it does broaden your talent pool to be able to find people in other places. But I think the specifics of the knowledge base, at least, does make it really hard if you're trying to sort of reach a new city. But yeah, I mean, in general, like I've always, I think the attributes I always look for when hiring are people who, culturally fits within the team. I think sort of dynamic is more important than anything else. And then the ability to connect the dots. And that isn't something, both those things are not really things that you can teach. So it's that everything else you can teach. But those are the two things, those are probably the two attributes and personality traits that I tend to look for.
Yeah, and I think there's never been a better time to just quickly experiment. I mean, you can hire someone, as a consultant for a short period of time to see if it's a good fit, especially in an international market. I mean, everyone's looking to support or somehow get tied to a US based company, and show that they can get that experience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to experiment there, especially with, Zoom and distributed being very commonplace channel right now. But to Mandy's point, I mean, hiring someone that can connect the dots. I mean, we always say hire for someone that can altitude switch. So be able to do the strategy, but be able to be into the trenches as well in the day to day and do, deep, in the weeds work as well. Cause, when you first start out in a new market, it's a lot of in the weeds, right? And a lot of it is strategy, but a lot of it is rolling up your sleeve and getting your hands dirty. So yeah, being able to do that altitude switching is so critical.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times in a new city when we've just launched, I've checked in people because there was no one else to do it. And you do that, or you like set up the chairs because that's what needs to be done. So somebody who's like, yeah, exactly to what Jen said, who is scrappy and can actually do that when time comes and are not like, this is above my pay grade. That's who you need. Because that, it's kind of the only way a lot of things are going to get done these days.
That's great advice. Kind of a lack of ego a little bit.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we have time for questions for anyone that might, if we have any, or for anyone that may have one. Angela, do we have anyone that has a question in the audience Q&A queue?
I have not seen any so far, but if anybody is a daredevil, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask the gals questions verbally.
If anyone wants to be brave, you're welcome to our cubes.
You just call up people.
Imagine like a class. Yeah.
Okay, well, while we're waiting, if anybody thinks of a question that they want to ask in the next few minutes, I did want to talk a little bit more about both of you being women entrepreneurs in 2021 and your connection to the mission of the foundation. I'm basically, when we created this, we were staring sort of down the barrel of the fact that in the pandemic, 2 million women have left the workforce in the past year. There's sort of more obstacles than ever for women to balance both life and work. Amongst the pandemic, kids being out of school, family members, being ill, etc., seems to predominantly fall on women. Just those are the numbers. So basically, as we're sort of looking ahead to what we can do or what people should be mindful of, is there anything that you're balancing right now as a woman entrepreneur that you wish that people knew about or were talking more about, or that should be brought to people's attention because it's continually ignored or anything? And I know that's okay if not, but thought I'd widen the scope a little bit as we near towards the end.
Jen, you want to start? I think you have a little more on your plate than I do.
Yeah, I mean,
I just came back from seeing her 10-month-old, so.
Yeah, I think women need to be. I think women, we were taught to like, when you're at work, family separate, keep it, keep everything, kind of close to your chest and just like get your work done and put a smile on your face. Right. And I think for women, if you can be more vulnerable, like I'll get on a call and like, I'm sorry, I have my 10-month-old, or I'll even bring my 10-month-old to the call if I don't have someone here to like help support. So I usually, I ask the person on the other end, I'm like, do you mind if my 10-month-old sits on my lap while we have a conversation? Like I'm fully focused on you, but I don't have a place where I can put him at the moment. And it just immediately just like takes down a lot of barriers, right? And disarms the other party. And they're like, oh, don't worry, I have a 2-year-old and he's screaming in the back. And all of a sudden you can kind of create a little bit of like energy with someone if you kind of bring your full self to the table. and feel vulnerable enough to do that. Now I'm lucky, I get to work from home. So I know a lot of people can't do that or not in a position to do that. I also am a co-founder of my company, so I don't have to ask permission to do that either. I just do it, right? And I think, I would empower people to see if they can, bring their full self to some of this and show people who they really are versus just work Jen, because that, there's a lot more to me and just be Jen, right? But I know that also comes from a place of being lucky to be able to do that. So yeah, that's just something that I've done in the past year that I know I probably would have been ashamed to do pre-pandemic.
Great.
There's some
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, we have some questions. Should we start? I know we only have a few minutes left, but Clarissa asked if both of you could speak about the progression of your careers, I guess in 1 minute, and how did you become aware of the work that you wanted to do?
I can go first and be really fast. I started off in investment banking and finance in general, and it was a great foundation, not for me culturally. I wanted to do something a little bit more out of the box, a little bit more where I felt like I had agency over what I was doing. It took a while and not a very linear path to get to where I eventually landed. I went to work for a media agency where I did equity research, worked in Asia, covered Asia and Latin America, sort of the start of that international experience. And then I went to GA because I really wanted to join a startup and I really believed in the mission, and I had seen, sort of what the recession in 2009 had done sort of for my peers and how useful or useless everyone's educations were. So I thought GA was doing a great job filling that niche. And really it was kind of through just doing things and sort of falling into like doing a variety of different roles within a startup and really carving out the place where I found that I was both good and had passion for. And I really loved sort of the building of physical spaces and being able to see something come to fruition, whether that's a plan to go to a new city or an actual physical build out that we're working on in a building. So that's sort of where I landed, and I wanted to do more work on that end of things. But I also, through GA, recognized that it was really important to me that whatever I was doing had a social impact, and that it was, I call it enlightened self-interest. It's a net good in the world that I wanted to be contributing to. So that was a really important thing that I was looking for in what I was doing.
Yeah, for me, I really love joining a company, the early stage startup where everything is still an assumption and nothing is validated or a truth yet, and being able to say, this actually works. Here's the evidence to show us that we've really found the pulse. And then once the pulse is kind of found, I'm like, this is now boring. So I love the really, really, really early stage scrappy, like you have to be somewhat delusional to try and join a company at this stage. That's what I love.
I feel like we should answer Alexa's question. What are some resources you can use to dive deeper into a country's regulations, monetary laws, culture, etc.?
I would think culture, talking to people, going there, and a lot of the other aspects, especially the administrative pieces. Most countries actually just did a lot of work with a lot of these organizations. Most countries actually have some sort of business development group that's in the US, that's probably in a major metropolitan city, whose job it is to help attract businesses to open up in their country. And so they are a great wealth of knowledge on how to get that done. And they can connect you with other companies, potential partners in that country, government officials you might need to know or get in front of for regulatory purposes. So they're a great starting point. Law firms also, law firms who do a lot of business overseas, but that is usually expensive compared to sort of these business development groups who a lot of times they also provide funding as well. So those are great resources to as like an initial place to start.
Yeah, I know a lot of countries that offer grants for people looking to expand and looking to take their current company into their new market. So there are a lot of trade organizations, like I know Australia has one, Canada has one, UK has one. I mean, there's a lot of different government-based entities that do offer a lot of this. The other thing too is, depending on who you're targeting, to Mandy's point, see if people can connect you or reach out and in a personalized note and just see if someone is willing to get on a call with you.
And existing clients, if they have offices
Exactly.
in other locations.
Wonderful. Well, just to close out here, I want to thank Jen and Mandy and also Angela and GA for hosting this today. Jen and Mandy, I mean, could go on for hours listening to both of you speak. You had wonderful, insightful answers to these questions today. I feel like we covered evaluating a market with international expansion, evaluating customers, go-to-market strategy, culture, talent, a kind of comprehensive look at this today. So I hope this was helpful to anyone tuning in. And of course, want to round it out with a plug for the Jessica Volman Foundation. We're really, really excited about being able to offer a sponsorship to 2 women entrepreneurs in the New York City area. So if you know anyone who's interested in applying, a link is in the chat. Or if you're just interested in connecting with us in general, we have contact info on there as well. Jen and Mandy, anything you want to add before we close out?
No, I'm super excited to be here, and this was a lot of fun, and I know we made JV proud.
Yes.
Thank you both. Angela, do we throw back to you?
I knew this was coming. I just want to say thank you so much, Sarah, Jen, and Mandy, for lending your time to share with the incredible insights that y'all have shared in the past hour to our virtual attendees. And I just want to say Jessica is definitely so proud of all of the work that y'all have put together. And again, as Sarah's mentioned, we have dropped the link for the Jessica Volman Foundation general site for you to check out and be a part of, and along with the scholarship link. But this will also be included in our follow-up email, so don't worry if you couldn't catch it all. But until next time, everybody stay safe, stay warm, and we hope to have you back again. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Angela.
Thanks.